دع الأيام تفعل ما تشاء وطب نفسا إذا حكم القضاء ولا تجزع لحادثة الليالي فما لحوادث الدنيا بقاء وكن رجلا
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers, sisters, friends, and yes, the foes out there. Welcome to another episode of the Blood Brothers podcast with your host, Dilly Hussein. Before I introduce today's esteemed and erudite guest who's joining us all the way from Dallas in United States, I want to remind all our avid listeners and followers and viewers to subscribe to the Five Pillars YouTube channel and to find us on all the usual audio podcast platforms. Today's guest, he is a established and celebrated historian, a theologian, an academic, one of the most influential figures in the Muslim da'wah scene in the Western world. He is the resident scholar of an epic mosque, epic being the acronym for the East Plano Islamic Center in Dallas, and he is the dean of the Islamic Seminary of America, and that is none other than Shaykh Dr. Yasir Qadhi. Shaykh, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal that all of these titles actually mean something on the Day of Judgment. And in this world, these are simply words that you say. Most important is our actions and ikhlas. And every time somebody introduces with all of these lengthy titles, we have to be very clear here that these titles mean nothing on the Day of Judgment. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us all ikhlas and taqwa. So it was, I don't like these long titles, but anyway, inshallah, let's, I hope you're doing well, Dilly. I think we have met once, I think in the past.
We have met very briefly once in the past. You have been interviewed by my colleague, Roshan Saleh, many years ago for Press TV.
Colleague, I didn't know that. Okay, mashallah.
Yes, he is indeed. And of course, we have many mutual brothers between us, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Sheikh, we've got a lot to cover today, a lot of ground to cover. But what I tend to do with guests who happen to be people of knowledge, I like to warm up the session with some quick fire questions, right? I want you to think of a boat journey that you're going on. 7 days on a boat journey. And you have to take one of the two individuals with you on this journey. Now, some of these figures are historical. They have passed. Some are still alive. Some of the answers I think I guessed right, but others I'll be interested to know who you would choose. And you do have the opportunity to just briefly elaborate on some of the choices if you feel the need to. You ready?
Okay. Bismillah, okay.
7 days, boat journey, 10 companions. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal or Imam al-Shafi'i?
You're going to get me into trouble, bro.
Come on. And you can't say both, you can't say neither. It has to be one of the two, Sheikh. Come on. It's a 7 day journey. You need to spend 7 days with them.
Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, because I would want to narrate a hadith to him and just get the barakah of listening and narrating a hadith.
Throughout your adult life and your journey in pursuit of knowledge, you have generally, if I'm correct, please correct me if I'm not, identified as a Hanbalite in most affairs?
Yes, and that's why I wanted to make the clarification. It's not because of the fiqh issue. If it was for the fiqh issue, frankly, I would have chosen Imam al-Shafi'i. But simply to get the barakah of the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, I would have chosen Imam Ahmad for this hypothetical, theoretical journey.
Okay. Obviously, I know, when it comes to your lectures, me personally, I very much enjoy your historical lectures, mashallah, tabarakallah. So I have to throw in some historical figures there as well. If you had to take one of the khulafa, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz or Harun al-Rashid?
Frankly, I would choose Harun al-Rashid simply because the fact that he was at a later stage means that he was exposed to more types of interactions with other civilizations and had to make more difficult decisions. In terms of piety, of course, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz would be the ideal in between those two, but my curiosity would be piqued by the circumstances of the early Abbasids, so I would choose Harun al-Rashid.
Okay. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi or Alp Arslan?
Again, I'm going to go off on a limb here. Because we don't know that much about Alp Arslan as compared to Salahuddin, I personally would have chosen Alp Arslan because, of course, again, in terms of grandiose and whatnot, what Salahuddin accomplished cannot be compared. But Al-Farsalan is a unique individual with a very exotic background, right? Salah al-Ayyubi is mainstream, Kurdish, Arab, whatnot. Al-Farsalan is coming from the far left and just making an impact. So me personally, yeah, I would have chosen Al-Farsalan. I've never thought about these questions. This is intriguing. Okay.
I'm sure this is one that you've had before, or one maybe you have even thought about in terms of your study periods. Imam Ghazali or Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah?
So obviously, there's no question that my personal association would want me to be with Ibn Taymiyyah if that's the only opportunity that I have. There's no question. I mean, I would love to pick Imam al-Ghazali's brain, but you can't compare. Like the tarbiyah that I've had for the last 25 years. Obviously, Ibn Taymiyyah, I still view him, despite all what my critics say, I still view him as being the Shaykh al-Islam and the person that I ascribe to the most overall. My ideology is Taymiyyan, so how can I possibly give it the opportunity to be with the legend himself?
Okay. Sultan Fatih or Sultan Aurangzeb?
Oh, come on, Aurangzeb, man. Come on, I'm Desi by blood, like there's just whatever Fatih has done, but to meet one of the sultans of the Mughal Empire, and yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a no-brainer for me.
Okay. Umar Mukhtar or Imam Shamil?
That's a good one. That's a good one.
We're getting closer to our time.
Either one. Wallahi, there's no...
You have to choose one. Come on, choose one. You have to choose one.
Yeah, I mean, I would personally Umar al-Mukhtar simply because, okay, so again, both are very similar, but because Umar al-Mukhtar was against the Europeans and because we are more connected to Europe and Europeans, I would feel more at home listening to his stories and benefiting from him. Obviously, Imam Shamil was against the Russians and whatnot, and that's a different civilization that me and you and others haven't directly interacted with to the level that we've interacted with Europeans. So very, very bizarre point, but I would choose somebody whose stories I could relate to more, if you get my drift.
Khair, okay. Jamal al-Din Afghani or Muhammad Abduh?
I mean, Afghani, I don't think there's much that I would have benefited, from him. I think he's a very interesting character to study, but I have little desire. Even Abdu, I mean, the both of them are interesting. I don't disrespect them, but I don't have the level of respect I would do for the next generation. So obviously Nasheed Rida is somebody that I actually connect with a lot personally. So because of that, Abdu had a more impact on Rida than Afghani. So I would choose Abdu for that reason. But yeah, not that much of a difference.
Okay, then in that case, Rashid Rida or Abu Ala al-Mawdudi?
Again, Rashid Rida is a bit more exotic for me. He's a generation before Mawdudi. Mawdudi, actually, I have a personal connection with. My father met him a number of times and was his part of the organization. So my father was a part of Jamaat in the 50s in Pakistan. Okay. And I've met many of his students, his sons. I know them personally. So he's not as exotic of a figure for me as Rashid Rida. So I'd have to choose Rashid Rida for that reason. Also, with my utmost respect to Mawdudi, great person, but Rashid Rida was an allama. He had studied, whereas, Mawdudi, may Allah have mercy and bless him and whatnot, he was self-taught. There's a big difference between the two.
Okay. Abdullah Azzam or Mullah Omar?
Azzam, without a doubt. Azzam, without a doubt. He is a legend.
Okay. Bringing it very closer to home and closer to our time. Imam Omar Sulaiman or our Ustad Abu Isa Damatullah?
You're going to get me into trouble, bro. In America, we have the Constitution and there's something called the Fifth Amendment, right? The Fifth Amendment means you don't have to incriminate yourself. So I'm going to call the Fifth over here and I'm going to say I refuse my constitutional rights. Both of them are Habib and dear friends. And if I were to choose the one over the other, I'm never going to hear the end of it as long as I live. So I'm going to choose my constitutional Fifth Amendment and zip it.
Okay. So then in that case, since you've taken the fifth, you have to allow me to ask you a sub-question in that regard. Which of our two dearest mashayikh of the two tend to hold you to account more with regards to your public works?
That's something that is separate from the first question, and it is Abu Isa for one simple reason that I've known him for way longer. I'm close friends with both, but I've known Abu Isa while we were both students. When he was in Mauritania and I was in Medina, he would come visit, and Egypt as well. And so we've known each other since we were students of knowledge. I mean, it's been 25 5 years, like a long time knowing each other, Whereas Imam Umar Sulaiman, I've only, we got to. I mean, he's obviously much younger than the both of us. He's a decade or so younger, and we only got to know each other after I had returned from Medina, and we're both active in da'wah. So that level has not been established for that reason. But he is a good friend of mine.
So I will now let the viewers and listeners to decide based on the fifth and on that explanation who you might, if it was a life and death situation. Last but not least, your 10th companion. Who would you take? Mufti Taqi Usmani or Shaykh Al-Qardawi?
I wish you had added one more person, the one that I consider my main mentor that is still alive, that is Shaykh Salman Al-Awda, but you didn't bring him in. May Allah facilitate his release.
Ameen.
I'd have to say Shaykh Qardawi simply because he's a generation older than Mufti Taqi, and so there's a lot more to benefit from it. Otherwise, they're both at a caliber that I respect and admire, but simply because Shaykh Qardawi is 30 years older, he would automatically get the respect that age brings about.
Okay, Jazakumullah khair. How did you find picking your guests for this hypothetical boat journey?
I've never had this icebreaker done to me. So interesting. Okay. It's an interesting exercise, and inshallah, I benefited, and inshallah, I'm going to use it in a future Q&A that I do. I'll also take this copyrighted version of an icebreaker and then choose figures that are even more controversial, if you like. You tried to choose some. Yeah. Alhamdulillah, you didn't go too far. Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. Shaykh, listen, let's kick today's podcast off with an area of conversation which you have discussed in great detail previously in previous podcasts, like our season 1 partners, the Mad Mamluks, when you did the most recent episode with them. I believe it was last year at some point. And that's your journey through what is generally understood to be a Salafiyah or the Salafist movement, or Najdi Dawah. I know there's various words and terminology, and I also acknowledge that it's a spectrum, and it would be unfair to kind of compartmentalize those labels to a spectrum of different groups and views and so forth. But it is an area which you've discussed in great detail. Why would you say that this area of conversation is something that you have chosen to speak quite openly about of late in recent years?
2 reasons. Number one, I feel that I owe it to my students, whom I taught ideas and concepts that I now no longer subscribe to, that I explain to them why I have changed my mind, and I leave it to them whether they want to continue with the ideas I taught them or they want to follow the new positions that I have. It's up to them. So I feel that there's a lot of conversations taking place, and it's my haqq upon my students to clarify to them, because I'm the one who introduced tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands via my books and lectures. And the first detailed sharh of Kitab al-Tawheed in English, I did it back in 1995-96, only on audio. It's not even on video. Kashf al-Shubuhat, I mean, teaching what I taught for my theology classes for a solid 15 years, basically, from 1995-96, Kitab al-Tawheed, all the way to around 2010 or so is when I really rethought certain things and whatnot. So over this entire time frame, I have been teaching tens of thousands of students online, in person, via publications, and then I have slightly modified. I'm not rejecting 99% of what I was upon. It's just certain very controversial issues, but still important ones, I've modified, and I feel that that wasn't correct what I taught them. So it's my responsibility to explain and clarify. It's up to those who took from me in that phase, whether they want to take this phase or not. It's not a big deal, whichever one they choose. That's the first reason. The second reason is that I feel that certain concepts, and it's related to the first one, certain concepts that I used to teach and that are mainstream in those segments of the Najdi Da'wah are, to put this gently, detrimental for Muslim unity. And in order for Muslim unity to be achieved, these types of questions need to be asked and answered head on, regardless of my own personal history, right? Okay. Regardless of me as Yasir Qadhi in 1995 and 2000 ever. These are issues that, in my humble opinion, people who subscribe to them with certain understandings will problematize forming alliances with other Muslims at a time frame when we most need those alliances, at a time frame where Muslim unity is of paramount importance, there are certain theological questions that are going to impede and hamper such unity. And if you subscribe to those particular understandings of Islam, then the logical consequence is that you are not going to prioritize any type of bond with your fellow Muslims whom you feel are committing acts of shirk or major bid'ah or kufr or whatnot. So for the sake of the problems that we're facing as an ummah, and I firmly believe one of the ways, and this is the Quranic way as well, that وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا, right? يَدُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْجَمَاعَةِ, right? The whole point of coming together. كُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا, as the Prophet said. Given the fact that we're facing so many controversies and issues and political problems across the globe, I really feel passionately that such misunderstandings need to be corrected or at least clarified, because some people are never going to change their mind. That's up to them. But those that are interested should hear. And as somebody who's been through the process and who knows what needs to be said and how it needs to be said, because I've experienced it myself, I feel that there is a type of obligation on me to at least attempt in a gentle manner, in a reasonable manner, in a manner that understands the mentality of people of a certain mindset, because I was one of them and I respect that, and I respect my teachers. Even as I have gently moved on, I've never ever criticized my alma mater or my mashayikh or anything of this nature. But yes, I have certain positions that I have moved on from, and I think that they should be clarified for the sake of betterment of the ummah. So these are the two main reasons that I think that it is important that such conversations take place.
I want to ask you your personal feelings, your inner thoughts. I don't want to rehash or regurgitate or go over some of the conversations that you've already had on various platforms. Is there a feeling of guilt that you've had during your journey of change and reformation in certain aspects? And we're talking about Islamic reformation here for our listeners and viewers. We're not talking about secular liberal reformation, we're talking about the reformation of the character of someone who's gone for a journey of pursuing knowledge. Have you ever felt guilty about the hundreds and thousands of prospective students that you may have taught and have had?
No, that's not the right word. Responsibility is the word, not guilt. The reason why I don't feel guilty is because I didn't do a crime. I didn't do anything wrong. One thing that I seek Allah's refuge from, and inshallah I say this with humility, without any boastfulness, one thing that I feel, inshallah ta'ala, ask Allah that it is true what I say. I have always taught Islam the way that I believe that it should be taught, not for public pandering, not for political correctness, not for gaining popularity or votes. Whatever I said about Islam, about any fatwa, about any position that I gave, I genuinely believed at that phase of my life that this was the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because inshallah ta'ala, I hope this is, I hope I'm not trying to, I hope it's in me. I believe that I have to answer to Allah for what I've said. And so whatever I say about the deen has to be done with a clean conscience. So at any phase of my life, whenever I taught whatever I did so believing it to be the truth. And Allah Azza wa Jal will judge people based upon their niyyat. So when I taught Kitab al-Tawheed, I genuinely believed that that version of Islam was the correct version. And my mashayikh and my teachers and everything is an entire system that I'm from. It's not, I'm not the one who invented it. I'm not the one who produced this. I'm a product of a certain movement. And I basically champion that movement, basing my knowledge on the knowledge of people far more pious than me and far more knowledgeable than me, right? And I'm a mere student of knowledge from their teachings. So I taught in good conscience. Then it became clear to me that certain aspects, and again, people read in too much. I have never rejected the entirety of the Athari creed. It's ridiculous. I am overall still Taymiyan and still Athari and whatnot. It's just certain issues, especially of the Najdi da'wah, I feel are problematic. And I say this with gentleness. I mean, I don't want to use any harsh adjectives. I mean, my mashayikh are good people, but so are mashayikh of other strands of Islam as well. So are the Ubandis, and so are the ulama of Jazair and Morocco, and the ulama of Habaib of Yemen. They're all good people. You cannot base the soundness of a creed based upon the piety of the mashayikh who teach it. If we were to do that, then the bulk of the Sunni ummah, alhamdulillah, is upon piety and taqwa. Right? So we need to move beyond emotionalism. And I'm straying from your question. Do I feel guilty? No. Wallahi, the word never even crossed my mind. The word is responsibility. That's what I feel. Responsibility, because I was one of the primary figures who introduced this understanding of, a soft version of the Salafi da'wah, the Najdi da'wah, throughout the late 90s and early 2000s with all of my books and teachings and whatnot. I was one of the main figures of this da'wah for such a long period of time. So the fact that I now disagree with some aspects of it, I feel there's a responsibility on me to clarify and explain. But no, there's not any, I've never felt guilt, because guilt means that I've done something wrong, and I don't feel that I've done anything wrong in this regard. Wallahu alam.
So let's pick up on an earlier point that you made. You said that there were specific aspects of that da'wah or of that creed which can be problematic and be, an obstacle to unity, which is something which is paramount in terms of a priority for the ummah right now. So let's just take some anecdotal examples. We were to look at how this. Even I'm uncomfortable with the wording, Shaykh. I swear to God. Whether it's Salafi or Najdi or even Wahhabi, these terms, I personally feel uncomfortable because I know it covers such a huge spectrum, but we know what we're talking about when we're talking about a very rigid, uncompromising interpretation of, let's say, Asma wa Sifat or Tawassul Istighatha and these types of topics, which can and are obstacles to Muslim unity, right? So if you're saying, and you've basically said just earlier that some aspects of these creedal points can be an obstacle to unity, so therefore you know that what you had taught over the period of time, that now there's a sense of responsibility to perhaps give a softer version, an alternative version to remove those obstacles. Would that be then correct?
Yes, that is a more accurate way to present it. That I believe that some of these issues need to be clarified so that Muslims don't view mainstream fellow Muslim movements and strands with the eye of extreme suspicion or hatred, or with charges of kufr or shirk or heresy to the point of no cooperation. What I'm trying to do is to bring about a very frank conversation, and my claim now is that mainstream Sunnism overall is a movement that we should not problematize the internal strands of. Any mainstream movement that takes the hadith of Jibreel and the 6 arkan of Iman as its foundational premises, the rest is then discussed. I'm not saying they're all right. I'm not saying everything is okay and it's, as they say, hunky-dory or sing kumbaya. But I'm saying discussions of intra-Sunni theological dispute should take place amongst the right people, with the right frame of mind and with the right language. These types of discussions should never come down to the street level and masjid level and the people that are just living their lives as Muslims. They should not problematize fellow Muslims who have another interpretation that goes back to Ghazali, that goes back to Al-Muhasibi, that goes back to, so-and-so of great ulama of the past. Let academic discussions remain among academics. So, and I've said this again very clearly, unfortunately, as you know the case, people love to extrapolate or read in. No, I've been very consistent in this message. I am not saying all interpretations are okay. What I'm saying is that we need to understand such discussions should not break the overall unity of the ummah. We need to learn to have these discussions with the right audiences. Never should the average Muslim who is struggling to pray 5 times a day be taught to hate another Muslim of another firqa who's also struggling to pray 5 times a day. That is my main issue of contention. And that's why I'm very public about this. When you believe that a certain strand is practicing shirk and kufr, automatically you're not going to want to have anything to do with them. That's the net result of what you have been taught. And that is why I am forced to gently, because I'm not being harsh here, gently bring up these discussions and say, no, it's not shirk and kufr what mainstream movements are doing. You can disagree. I still believe certain aspects are haram, but to say something is haram, at least the person is a Muslim. Whereas when you say it's shirk, well, then it changes everything, doesn't it? So that's why I'm saying these types of discussions need to be had head on, and we need to clarify, and I need to clarify because I have a responsibility. I'm the one having taught some of these aspects. The fact that, no, it's not, shirk, again, to be specific here. So for example, tawassul, or asking, and we've had I have, lectures. So anyway, I have to say this, by the way. We're not talking about the actual issues. If you're interested, you can listen to Number one, the most important is my 3-hour lecture on the Najdi Da'wah, it's called. It's on my YouTube channel. You can listen to that. It's a 3-hour long lecture on the Najdi Da'wah. I've talked a little bit about this as well in my first podcast with the Mad Mamluks, right? That was, I think, 3 years ago. A little bit about this as well. Yeah. And then also Muhammad Hijab interviewed me about my time in Medina. Yeah. And you can listen to that. So these are the 3 interviews that I would recommend anybody to listen to get to the core of what we are skirting around in this interview with you. I've already discussed the core details in those interviews.
So the fact of the matter is, Shaykh, that the reality is that whilst you said that these conversations should take place, there is a place for it in the right environment with the right people, and it shouldn't trickle down on a grassroots street masjid level. But the point of the truth of the matter is it did, whether it's the Indian subcontinent, whether it be in places like Syria with Mashaykh like Ramadan al-Bouti and others and his contemporaries. It definitely took place in the UK. Everyone knows about the noughties, the Dawah wars of the 90s in the UK. I'm very sure it did happen also in America. The fact of the matter is that these theological intra-sectarian discussions and debates did take place. Can it ever be contained?
No, it can never be contained. The goal is not perfection. It's never going to happen. But the goal is to minimize evil. And if the major du'at and the major preachers and teachers simply change their tune, which has happened in North America since the 90s, so they change their tune and they don't emphasize these intra-sectarian disputes, then inshallah the bulk of the ummah will be free of them. I'd like to say that America, the Muslim scene here, has headed in that direction. Again, I'm a product of the 90s. These sectarian wars you talk about, I was in the thick and thin of them back in the 90s. Indeed. Right? I was a part of all of this, and that has what shaped me to understand. I mean, one of the main, so again, let me give an anecdote here. When I returned from Medina in 2005, right, there was no question I was a card-carrying Najdi, right? I was preaching and teaching Ibn Abdul Wahhab, and I hadn't changed one iota of my belief about the Najdi da'wah. 2005, 2006, an incident happened in a MSA. It's an ISOC, you call it, yes, MSA, yes, ISOC, yes, yeah. Where some of our students of the Al-Maghrib Salafi, version, whatever, and some of Zaytuna, and I'll mention names here so that people understand. Zaytuna's crowd, which is obviously slightly different, that they had a very big verbal clash, and they decided to split up and form 2 ISOCs, 2 MSAs. This was on a university campus, okay? Yeah. And I knew, but 2 degrees of separation, I knew the people involved on our side, and it really hurt me. Like, I realized, bro, that's not, at that stage I said, we disagree with them, but not to this level. But then I thought to myself, can I blame these 2, teenage groups for getting to this level when they're constantly hearing rhetoric from us and from their teachers of this nature? Can I really blame them for wanting to just break away, thinking that each one is mubtadi' and dal and mudil? And that's when I reached out to Imam Zayd Shakir. This is early 2006, to Imam Zayd Shakir, and began a series of conversations that eventually led to something. Again, it's gone now in history, but it was called the Pledge of Mutual Respect or something. This is like a document that we signed between many of our preachers and teachers and those of the Sufi Ash'ari camp at the time, where we basically said, hey guys, we're not going to prioritize sectarian differences, And at the time, I was a card carrying, Najdi through and through, but I realized that we cannot prioritize these differences amongst the masses. And that was simply because of the environment that I found myself in. To see that people are going to literally break away from one another, form different masajid, and form different MSAs based upon Imam Ghazali and Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, no, that's not Islam. But that's what's going to happen when you constantly keep on telling them, oh, these people are dal and mudil and the Ahl al-Bid'ah and the Ash'ar are like this, or they say the Hashawi are like this. You have to minimize that rhetoric. I think we both learned from the 90s and then 9/11 and all of the backlash that happened and whatnot. And inshallah, these days, at least in the North American scene, we really don't have a mainstream preacher who is still upon that 90s version, because we've realized that it doesn't make any sense to be isolationist and to burn all our bridges with one another. No, what unifies us is far, far more than what splits us apart. And the kalima is the most important thing that unifies us. Even if we disagree about asma al sifat, or we disagree about certain aspects of tasawwuf and whatnot, those disagreements should not lead to the breaking of bonds between the ummah as a whole. So again, this is a personal anecdote that it made me realize I need to think things through. That led to the journey of trying to understand intellectually, because again, I'm jumping the gun here, but I needed to reconcile in my own mind how we can form ties with groups of people that I'm being taught are committing shirk. You see? My heart is telling me that we need to form bonds for the ummah. And these are people of iman and taqwa. I meet them, I interact with them, and they have great precedents. When they quote their fatwa of tawassul, whatever it might be, they have a long list of ulama from Suyuti and from, Ibn Hajar and Nawawi. All of them are allowing this thing, and you know this. I mean, this is well known, right?
Yes.
And yet I am being taught that specific aspects of what they're doing is shirk and kufr. Okay? So how do I reconcile forming bonds with people whom intellectually I'm being told, and I believe at that time, that this is shirk? And that's a cognitive dissonance. You're put in a very awkward situation. And this is what forced me to go back and really, as I said, with an open mind, think, is it really shirk? What my teachers have taught me. I'm meeting these Muslims. I don't see them as Hindus. I don't see them as pagans. I see them with their iman, their taqwa, their tahajjud, their dhikr. I see them and they genuinely love Allah and His Messenger. And I see them quoting great ulama, far greater than, many of in our movement, for example. And yet I'm being taught that this is shirk and kufr. And this is why I needed to really reconcile. And as I said, it's in my Najdi lecture, the 3-hour-long one. I went into a very deep dive and a year and a half reading, rethinking critically and whatnot. And then obviously it became clear to me that you can disagree and you can say, yes, they should not be doing that. But it's not shirk whatsoever. The term shirk should never be applied to what mainstream ulama have endorsed throughout Islamic history. That's a very dangerous term. That's a loaded term. Do not use the term shirk or kufr to describe mainstream Sunnism. You can say, I disagree, and it is not correct. And it is a stepping stone, I have said this, to shirk. Yes, I have said this. Calling the dead, wallahi, I don't like it at all. And it's something that really we should not open the door to. But what are you going to do? These are Muslims that have great precedents. They have great ulama within our tradition. We're not talking about outside our tradition. And I think you as well, didn't you moderate a debate?
Yes, I did indeed.
I heard about this, yeah. So you've heard the evidences. It's not as if it's coming out of thin air.
Oh, it's normative, very much normative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is normative. That's the point that our, Najdi brethren fail to understand. This, you're talking about the Salaf, you find whiffs of this in the first, tawassul, the first 3 generations, no doubt about it. Imam Ahmad allowed tawassul according to many of his own students, right? And then you have Ibn Taymiyyah, with my utmost love and respect, saying it's a bid'ah, okay? Many of the Salaf allowed tawassul.
So, Shaykh, if I may interject there, yeah, because you cited it. So when I chaired that debate on the permissibility of tawassul istighath between Shaykh Rasheed, who doesn't identify as a Barelvi, but Hanafi Ash'ari, and then Ustad Abdul Rahman Hassan, who was obviously of that persuasion, of the Najdi persuasion. And I recall at the very beginning, Shaykh Asrar, he said that, look, our issue isn't that you believe it's haram. Our issue is that you believe it's shirk. Because essentially what you're doing by extension here, you're making takfir on us, takfir light on us, yeah? You can't open the heart of every single person who visits the grave. You don't know that they're asking the person who's deceased independently to give them X, Y, and Z. So here we are debating. Do you believe seeking assistance or aid from the deceased, not independent of Allah? And whatever our argument is it shirk or is it haram? And I remember Abdul Rahman Hassan said it's shirk. And he said, and this is why we are here debating.
Exactly my point. If you say it is haram, then you can agree to disagree and maybe even have a heated debate, but in the end you will part as brothers.
Yeah.
Because you haven't made takfir or shirk. That's my point here, right? Yeah. If you say it is shirk, which is what the Najdi Da'wah says, you can't form strong alliances with people that you think are basically soft Hindus. I mean, how are you going to do that, And as you're aware, this is what this is what the Najdi Da'wah teaches. And I have an anecdote in my lecture, the 3-hour-long one. I even spoke to one of their senior scholars, Bin Bayya, and I said to him, like, how do you expect us to reconcile, forming bonds with people that we think they're doing shirk? I asked him this question. This is me in 2005, 2006, problematizing, like, look, what maslaha is there? And this is what the Najdi say. What maslaha is there in forming ties of relationship with people that are not actually Muslims? And they have a valid point from their paradigm. There is no maslaha politically or theologically from forming ties with people that you think are committing shirk and kufr. You understand this point? And that's why, for example, anybody who believes the Prophet ﷺ is not the final prophet, you know the group I'm talking about.
Of course.
I have nothing to do with them. What
100%.
maslaha is there? What
Yeah, of
maslaha
course.
is there? Nothing. I have nothing to do with them. I don't want to do anything with that movement because I don't view them as being kith and kin to me. Right? They're a different firqa, and not even firqa, sorry. They're a different deen. They have nothing to do with Islam.
100%.
Okay, now if you're going to say mainstream tasawwuf, Ghazalian tasawwuf is kufr and shirk, right? If you're going to say 90% of the ulama of Yemen and, you know, Morocco and many in Azhar and whatnot are practicing shirk, what are you going to do to the ummah? And that's why I have to say, at least amongst our circles that listen to us, I don't give khutbas about this. My lecture series are not about these issues, but for academic audiences, and even in the library chat, I said this is an academic talk. If you're interested, you have the background. We need to clarify that this interpretation of calling it shirk is a minority one. You can call it haram, and you have giants that have called it haram. Ibn Aqil said it's haram. My argument, and I know this caused a controversy, but I stand by this. It appears very clear to me that Ibn Taymiyyah is also upon this position, and that Ibn Abdul Wahhab misinterpreted Ibn Taymiyyah. And I quoted Ibn Taymiyyah as well. And as I said, further research needs to be done because you do find passages that are ambiguous in nature. So we need to compile all the passages and get a clear cut. But it is very clear to me, at least at this stage, and I'm willing to be corrected or sit with specialists. But at this stage, it is clear to me that as a default, Ibn Taymiyyah said it is haram to ask the dead, and it could be shirk. And this is the position that I hold.
You know, in terms of, sorry, Shaykh. So in terms of matter, you've said that. Look, so someone accepts the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam and the 6 arkan of iman. Does that mean these matters of asma wa sifat and istighatha, tawassul, and so forth? Do you believe these to be furu'i matters now, as opposed to very core creedal matters in the past?
Me personally, at this stage of the history of the ummah, yes, I do. I do. At this stage. What I mean by this is that we do need to be contextual. What I mean by this is that I am not damning the past ulama who made this a big issue. Maybe it was for their time and place the right time to discuss this, right? But what I am saying is that too many scholars are living in a replicated bubble of their own making. Too many scholars make these issues of the past just as important as they were in the past. They're making them now, and that is a mistake, because we now have a different set of issues that the past did not have. Never in the history of the ummah have we faced the type of ridda going on, the attacks, the agnostic and atheistic, attacks on Islam. Never have our second, third generation, en masse, I would say, having these shubuhat of the validity of our faith as they do now. So rather than bring up controversies about the sifat of Allah Azza wa Jal, let's talk about the existence of Allah to a group of people that are doubting His existence. Let's talk about proving the prophethood of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to a group that are wondering, should he be followed or not? Okay? So the context that we live in brings about a different set of issues. Now, advanced students in Medina and advanced students in, Deoband and advanced students in Al-Azhar, if they want to come together and talk about istawa ala al-arsh and nuzul and whatnot, alhamdulillah, it's a very useful exercise, and I'm not against and opposed to that. But they should not translate those academic arguments to their respective masses and cause the people to hate one another, boycott one another because of these controversies.
Before we move on to the next topic of discussion, let me posit this to you. Would you say that your shift in position, I don't want to use the word awakening, I think it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but some of the realizations that you had come to, would you say the environment forced you to do this, or
Yes.
your increased observations and experience with other Muslims?
Well, that's the same thing.
No, because post 9/11, did that push you to do it? Because there's a thing in the UK here, Sheikh, where it's like an unspoken thing, but we said, look, the Salafis here had to tone their stuff down because post 9/11, post 7/7, the Salafis or the Wahhabis became the target of the CVE operation and the system. So the environment pushed them to tone down some of the rhetoric.
I see what you're saying. No, not the environment. The context, again, it's not governmental pressure. It's the realization that we don't have the luxury to be so isolationist. The realization that it is nonsensical for 20 Muslims of a particular Salafi persuasion to say, we are the ghuraba and we are the Ahl al-Haq and we're not going to pray behind anybody else. And this is nonsensical. Now, pre-9/11, you are not forced to think through the ramifications of being ghuraba. Pre-9/11, and you are old enough to remember this, most of our other audience, they wouldn't even know this, but the level of freedoms that we had are unimaginable, you know?
Pre-9/11, there was fundraising for the jihad in Bosnia.
Exactly. Azzam came to America, by the way. We talked about Azzam came to America under American supervision and fundraised here in America, in Oklahoma and other places, and the government allowed this, you know? It's a different world altogether. So it's not governmental pressure. It's that we were allowed to be blissfully naive. That's really the way I view it. We were allowed some naivety in terms of our political and theological understandings. Post 9/11, post 7/7, the government backlash, the war in Iraq, the rise of Al-Qaeda, the rise of ISIS, all of this, it's like a punch in the face to us. Like, okay, do you really believe this stuff? And I've said this in the Najdi Da'wah video. The rise of ISIS, to me, was a huge wake-up call. Because as an academic who taught jihadist movements in my university, I taught at university, the Western University, Rhodes College. I taught a class on jihad, and I taught a class on radical Islam. And so I'm reading their books, and I'm explaining and whatnot, reading the material of ISIS. It is very clear that they are quoting the Najdi Da'wah and the first phase of the Najdi Da'wah.
They are indeed.
Now, and what it became very clear to me at the rise of ISIS that, hey, the Najdi Da'wah, phase 1, 1790, 1800, and the current movement of ISIS are very, very, very similar. Not exactly the same, but there's too much similarity. Yeah. And why am I feeling uncomfortable at ISIS if it is the Najdi Da'wah? As practiced by Ibn Abdul Wahhab, because the Najdi Da'wah is original, and ISIS is original. They go back to the Najdi Da'wah. They don't like the third wave Najdi Da'wah. I went over this in my Najdi lectures. You can listen to that, right? Why am I uncomfortable if this is what I actually believe? Because when you see the impact of saying everybody else is a kafir and mushrik and we're going to execute them, which is what ISIS did, right? Everybody who doesn't follow our khilafah, everybody who doesn't follow our understanding of Islam, automatically you're a mushrik. We can do this, we can do that, and they did it. Why am I feeling uncomfortable? And it made me realize that I need to think deeply about this, because if it is true, then I should not feel uncomfortable. And if it's not true, well then I have misunderstood. And so that it was an awakening because of our circumstances, not because of governmental pressure. I mean, inshallah, I seek Allah's refuge from ever changing the deen because of what somebody else says. But sometimes you realize something because of experience. And to me, this was it, to see we don't have the luxury of breaking up the bonds of the ummah over classical issues of asma wa sifat or istighatha or tawassul, and to uncomfortably realize that almost all of the terroristic movements have one degree of separation from Najdi Da'wah, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's ISIS, whatnot. Why don't we find those movements coming from other strands of Islam? Not that other strands are innocent of all crimes. Other strands are guilty of subservience to the rulers. You get my point with Egypt and whatnot, right? So when I criticize the da'wah I came from, it's not exonerating other da'wahs. And that's another point I need to be clear here. Every single strand of Islam has its faults. Every single strand of developed, theological, political strand, whether it's Deobandism, whether it's, the Habaib of Yemen, whether it's, the Qayrawan University, whether it's Al-Azhar, there is no one that's 100% correct. That's Allah and His Messenger. Al-Haq is Allah Azza wa Jal. Every strand has its pros and cons. I have more of a duty to speak about the strand that I came from, because that's me, and I have the right to say this. Whereas if I start criticizing other strands, that might lead to sectarianism. So where was I? Completely lost my train of thought.
You're talking about you've got grounds and bases to criticize the thinking and the background that you came from.
Yes. So the reality of the world situation forced me to reassess my theological views. That's what it is. It's not pressure from anybody else. Alhamdulillah, that pressure, even if it increased, I was never jailed, but I was harassed and intimidated at airports and interrogations, the standard post 9/11 stuff that happened, the governmental monitors when I traveled here and there, every country I'd go to. I mean, minor nuisance in the grand scale of things. I was never put into jail. But inshallah, I hope, may Allah protect me from jail. I hope that never would I change my theology simply because of a threat of an external factor. My religion is more precious to me than that. So no, it's not pressure, but it is political context within the ummah.
Some have said in the UK, wallahi, we're not making any remote comparison to you, but there have been some in the UK who came from that background, right? I mean, let's take Shaykh. I'm just saying beforehand, we're not making any comparison. This is an example that I'm citing from the UK. If we take the son of Sheikh Suhaib Hassan, Dr. Osama Hassan, who came also from that background, someone who you have conversed and debated with, the very famous debate from many years ago. He was someone that many have said that when he came into exposure to secular academia, that's when the concerns of Osama Hassan and his Ajib, and of course now we know very clear heretical views became apparent. It was due to the exposure of secular academia. Have you personally ever felt your exposure, your journey, your experience, your pursuit of knowledge in the secular academic path has ever shaken or questioned your Islamic foundations or even certain positions with regards to creed and theology?
Not Islam, no. Alhamdulillah, I've never, ever doubted the religion of Allah Azza wa Jal, not for 1 millisecond of my adult life, alhamdulillah. And the reason for this, and I don't mind saying this, and I say this inshallah as a love for the Quran, not as a praise of me. The reason for this is because I memorized the Quran as a teenager, 13, 14 years old, 15. So when you memorize the Quran and you're reading it and you're reciting it, and alhamdulillah, inshallah, every day there's a little recitation. I mean, when you do that, the Quran is a protector. The Quran is something that is in the heart of the person. Inshallah, it's almost impossible for somebody who recites the Quran to ever doubt it. And maybe there's one in history, maybe it's happened, but it's not going to happen, inshallah, as a norm, right? So never in my life has there been a shak about the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal because of the Quran. Because of the Quran. There's just no question. Interpretations of Islam, yes, no doubt. I'm not going to lie about that, no question. Interpretations of how we understand something, yeah, but that's not the religion of Islam. That is an interpretation of a trend. I said this in the Najdi Da'wah lecture. My studies at Yale had nothing to do with my changing my Najdi Da'wah creed. That has to do with what I explained to you. But what Yale did do is it taught me tools of contextualization and what is called critical thinking. I mean, you can call it whatever you will, but it's an usul of how to study ilm. That's really what it is. It's a paradigm of how you view history, of how you view intellectual development. You know, as I said in other lectures I've given, you know, my teachers at Yale did not know Islam better than I did. That's not the reality. But they are exposed to overall the science of knowledge and the science of history.
Sheikh, can those secular tools be utilized in making sense of the Islamic epistemology or Islamic creed? Can those tools which you...
Not fully, for sure not fully. But are you going to reject everything? That doesn't make any sense, because we find many of these tools practiced by Imam al-Dhahabi, for example. Okay? The tools of approaching history are free of any ideology or theology. Okay? The tools of approaching intellectual developments is something that has nothing to do with any one religion or civilization. And again, this is not the time to get into there, but I have given other examples in other lectures that I've spoken about. It's really something that transcends any one faith or tradition. How we view history, and one point that in my expertise of theology I greatly benefited from, in Medina, for example, you don't really connect the dots when it comes to other civilizations. Everything begins historically from our Arabic sources. When you break away from only Arabic sources, you can begin to connect the dots with Byzantine, with Sassanid empires, with the various trends pre-Islam and post-Islam. And an example that I'll give the viewers that are watching this, I gave a library chat on the origins of the Sifat controversy. Okay? I advise you to listen to that one. On the origins of the Sifat controversy. Why did the Sifat become problematic? This actually goes back to intra-Christian disputes that were taking place in Syria when the Muslims conquered it.
Of course.
Now, we don't really know the details of those disputes from our Arabic sources. There are references. Ghailan al-Dimishqi said this, or Sawsan said this, or whatever said that. There are references, okay? But when you break away from the only Arabic sources and you enter into ancient Greek, ancient Latin, or ancient, Aramaic sources, when you start studying other histories, all of a sudden you begin to connect the dots in ways you couldn't connect from only your own tradition. Why is that problematic? Where would the problem come if you understood that the Sifat controversy is actually something that is emanating from, intra-monophysite Christian sectarian debates?
Can I say where the problem can come? When you're saying connecting the dots, I think the issue that some have said that when you start, I guess, breaking away from what's regarded as normative Arabic sources and trying to understand the wider reality and contextualization of that specific discussion at that time, it would be that it wouldn't necessarily be a case for connecting the dots for those who are fortunate to be firm upon their faith. It would be the blurring of lines between the dots. If you understand what I'm trying to say.
There's a risk. I mean, there's always a risk. There's no question about that. And I do not encourage Western academia unless you know what you're doing. I've said this multiple times. I've never encouraged the average graduate of a madrasa or whatnot to just jump into Western. It's a different paradigm. You need to know what you're getting out of it, and you need to want to get it out of there. Otherwise, yes, agreed. So if you start historicizing the Quran or the Prophet ﷺ, you have left everything.
Of course.
And that's my line. And I said this in my public lectures, right? The Quran is a divine spark that came down. The Quran is Allah's revelation. We do not historicize it. That's the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ as a person, as an individual. He was chosen by Allah Azza wa Jal. We don't historicize, there are messianic movements before. No. But history, Islamic history, that's not divine. Islamic history, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, okay?
These are incidents and events that took place.
Exactly. The controversies that occurred in the first century, that's not divine. No. So I believe, and again, I'm not asking anybody to agree with this, it's my position. I believe that I am taking the best of both worlds, and inshallah, it's up to the viewers to synthesize and see. Listen to especially my library chats. That's where I really become a little bit more academic. Listen to my library chats and judge for yourself. This is what I'm doing. That I believe I'm taking the best of both worlds. But at the same time, and again, I guess I'll make this disclaimer here. And again, I've said this multiple times and I'll say it very clearly. I do not want to cause any doubt of any issue to any Muslim that is practicing Islam upon an established trend and with mashayikh and ulama that he looks up to. So if a person is happy in the trend that they're upon, whether it is tasawwuf, whether it is Deobandism, whether it is Barelvism even, whether it is whatever it might be, and they're worshipping Allah, and they're happy, and they feel confident in what they're doing, good for them. I am not asking anybody to leave what they're upon and then follow my a'udhu billah version, which is not a version. No, I am preaching and teaching to a niche audience. It's up to them to take it or leave it. I don't want to invite anybody away from an established school so that they doubt their school and then, approach this. Rather, what I have found, there are many Muslims who are intellectually curious and they find my type of teaching appealing to them. That's my audience. Okay. Simple as that. I'm not calling anybody away, even Najdis or whatnot. If you're happy where you're upon, good for you. Stay where you are. Just don't cause fitna in the ummah. You and the Sufis and the don't cause fitna in the ummah. Worship Allah. Go to your masjid. Be pious and righteous. Support the causes of the ummah. And inshallah, you will all enter Jannah based upon iman and taqwa and piety. Allah will not cause you to enter Jannah because you have a big S on your chest that you are a Salafi or a Najdi. That's not how you enter Jannah. So I am not wanting to cause anybody's version of Islam to be in doubt. But I'm preaching and teaching in a way that appeals to a certain segment. And generally, these are people that are not interested in one particular sect, and they're wanting to be more ecumenical, and they find my teaching to be of use to them.
Shaykh, so I'm glad you kind of concluded on the point of the disclaimer that you don't want to cause doubts, and you certainly do not want to move people away from established practices of their deen and so forth. But let's go into not details. Perhaps if you're comfortable, we can do that later on. But some of the quote unquote controversies, right? And the somewhat unfortunate context in the way they came to surface, right? Before we get to that, some would argue that whatever it was, whether it was the Juj and Ma'juj position that you clarified, whether it was your conversation with our brother Muhammad Hijab regarding the huruf of the Quran and so forth, and the preservation of the Quran, and whether it was a 2-3 minute clip that was doing the rounds with, when you were in I believe it was an interfaith discussion, it was about the hudud, whatever it may be, whatever those topics that had caused quote unquote somewhat of an uproar in Muslim Twitter or Muslim online, do you believe that there is a basis for the awam to hold people of knowledge to account in the way that it has become so normal on social media?
It is not the haqq of the awam to question the ulama. It is the haqq of other ulama to question the ulama. It is a communal obligation that Allah has placed upon the people of knowledge. Okay. Because we cannot expect for the awam, Hanafi Shafi'i might be a huge difference, which it is in many places, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, as you know. Where you put your hands becomes a fitna. Whether you say Ameen out loud or not becomes a fitna, right? Yeah. This is what happens when you allow the awam to become the policers and enforcers. And we see the chaos that is being caused, around the social media, when people who are not qualified to criticize take it upon themselves to criticize. And again, obviously, you're touching a personal nerve, because all of us are frustrated and irritated. There's no denying this. We're human beings. We're all frustrated and irritated by the rise of, a new class of people who, let me choose my adjectives with care, they display neither knowledge nor wisdom nor Islamic mannerisms. And they are, I'm using this with care, wallahi, but it's clear that some of them really are fitna mongers. And I don't say this harshly. I say this factually. They want to cause drama and create controversy when none should exist. And they find clips that are obscure, unknown, 10-second clips of Umar Suleiman, myself, Abu Isa, whatever. And, maybe even years old, maybe even the context is very clear. And they'll take it and then spread it with a very, harsh adjectives and words and, pagan rituals and kafir and, crypto reformers and whatnot. And subhanAllah, any person of ilm, if he came across this, would either, understand what the context was going on, or make an excuse based upon the entire methodology of the person, which is well known with internet and YouTube, or at the very least, make sure that they understand that this is actually correct and make a phone call or find out before making a drama out of it, right? So this is what happens when proper Islamic protocol is not followed. You don't need to subscribe to Netflix or HBO. Facebook becomes your entertainment session because of the social drama. And fitna is created when none should have been created. And people become involved in things that are of no benefit to them iman-wise, and rather are distractions, and rather bring about a sense of sin, maybe even by saying things they shouldn't say. And then also, a'udhu billah, it harms overall preaching and teaching, because a sense is created, a false sense, that all teachers and preachers are sold out, except for a group of nobodies, to be honest, a group of untrained, whatever. These are the people upon the haqq. And I've spoken about this as explicitly as I can in my interview on Madkhalism with Hijab. You can listen to that. I have many Facebook posts about this issue, but it is what it is. People like to do that. So no, to answer your question, no. The average Muslim should stick with ulama that they like and appreciate. If any alim, and that includes, a talib ilm like me, brings doubt to them, abandon that and stick with the people that you trust. But do not create a controversy and do not speak about others. That's not your role. Follow your ulama and worship Allah Azza wa Jal, and don't take from people that you feel doubtful about.
Shaykh, in that case, let me just play the advocate of the other side, for a moment. The fact that when these clips, statements have been circulated, have surfaced years after, have been shared with blurbs that are somewhat vitriolic and very, very targeted and so forth. The fact is that when that's happened, clarification statements have been issued by yourself, have been issued by Imam Omar Suleiman, have been issued by Professor Jonathan Brown, has been issued by Hamza Yusuf when he says he's tired and therefore he said so. So the fact is that when we get clarifications and excuses, what it does, and I'm just saying this, is that it comes across as, so there was some khair in this being circulated and shared because it forced them to clarify a matter or them to retract on a matter and so forth. That's what the other side would argue to some degree.
So you're the one, not you, but you're the one who brought this minor slip up to international media attention. Nobody would have known about it. Okay? Hamza Yusuf's clip, for example, clearly it was a mistake. Clearly. And he himself clarified. And the context of it, you know, it was taken years before the actual uprising, whatever. I'm not justifying. Clearly it was a mistake. But nobody knew about it until that 10-second clip goes viral. Justification is done. Umar Suleiman's clip, no doubt, when I saw it, it was like, astaghfirullah, bro, why would you do that? But I know him well enough to know that there is no kufr or shirk involved. You know, you do something, you don't understand the repercussions. He himself clarified. But here's the point. If that particular person had not found, after scouring thousands of materials, that 10-second clip that goes back 4 years and made a big controversy over it, it would not have been a controversy. So why create? You could have called Umar Suleiman, tell him, bro, you have this clip here. I know this is a mistake. He would have, you know, cut it off of YouTube. Khalas, no damage done. But to accuse him of being like a secret murtad, you know, libation, and he's doing pagan rituals. Come on, bro. Yani have some iman and taqwa. This is a person, inshallah, I have no doubt, prays the Hajjud, memorizing the Quran, whatnot. You're going to say he is a secret pagan? So, and with me, of course, I don't want to get personal, but again, the same thing, a crypto reformer. A'udhu billah, akhi. Qadhi is a crypto reformer, he's a semi-murtad. Shaykh Salman al-Audi, these are my mashayikh, you know, in terms of fiqh and whatnot. So accusing me of being somebody who wants to destroy the deen, and I have mashayikh far bigger than me that are saying the exact same thing. And either this person is ignorant or willfully ignorant, or again, so it gets painful because wallahi, nobody likes to be accused in the deen. And this is pure kadhib and buhtan, and anybody who makes these accusations intentionally, I find it difficult to forgive in this world. Maybe in the akhirah I will forgive, but after I get my ajr. After I get my ajr fully from this type of slander, because it is slander of the highest magnitude. So I throw it back to you and I say, they're the ones who created the controversies in the first place. Now, that doesn't mean every single case should be ignored. But if an average person finds something problematic, they should go to their own teachers, their own ulama. They should go and up the hierarchy, how it's supposed to be done. Have a shaykh or an alim or a talib al-ilm, then contact the person. Figure out, is it worthy to go public and make a clip that say this is wrong? Or can the damage be done? In the end of the day, ya akhi Dilly, look, whether you like it or not, certain individuals are so active in preaching to the masses that attacking them is going to attack many of the people's attachment to knowledge. You know, I don't mind saying this. Should I mention this name or not? Let me just say, because I don't want to get into trouble. One of the most prominent white converts to Islam, senior to me in age and conversion, leave it at that, has certain political stances that I disagree with. I'll just be generic here, okay? And I met him 3 years ago, and I showered him with praise in a way that...
In Hajj? I believe you met him in Hajj?
I'm not going to mention names, bro. I showered in private, me and him and just his students. And I said, Shaykh, for many people, you are the icon of Islam in North America. For many people, you represent the tradition. I gave him so much praise, and it was from the heart. It wasn't something completely false. And I tried to use that, and I say, Shaykh, when people attack you because of your stances, they are attacking the deen and religiosity and ilm. And I said this to somebody whom I actually disagree with on a maybe fiqhi or aqadi level as well. But inshallah, I am, open-minded enough to realize that this individual represents a tradition of Sunni Islam. And attacking him is attacking orthodoxy to one level. So I begged him to rethink through his positions, because I understood that the people that are attacking him, many of them are secularists. Many of them don't like the deen. And they're using him as an example of attacking the religiosity of people. You understand what I'm saying here? Without mentioning him.
So I want to counter it back to you, and I want to say that what about, let's put aside the secular critics. Let's put aside those who deep inside do not love the deen of Islam. Let's talk about those who do have ghira for Islam, and would say that, let's not talk about a specific person of law. Let's talk generally. When prominent scholars of that ilk affiliate themselves to particular states or a particular mindset, that has real life repercussions on the ground in places like Egypt. It has real life repercussions in places like Libya. It has real life repercussions to do with the censorship and the policing of peaceful charitable organizations in the West. So how much tiptoeing and how much softness is required when that kind of affiliation and support?
Very valid point, and I don't have an easy answer. To this day, I have refused to wage online war or battle against these particular individuals to this day. And that's my ijtihad, and I could be wrong. I admit.
Have you ever been tempted to? Have you ever considered it?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes, because some things have happened in those lands, in the rich, oil-rich countries, and these individuals have said things, it hurts like anything. And you feel like, but then, and this is a very personal thing, but inshallah, I hope there's ikhlas here. I have to question myself. Am I doing this so that I can level the playing field and get rid of other people on the da'wah playing field for my own ego? Or am I doing this genuinely for the sake of Allah? And that is one reason why I feel maybe I'm not the best person to do this. Because I understand that shaitan, his waswasa could be deep. And I have to doubt my own reasons why I might be doing that. So I have erred on the side of caution, and I have been silent even about their teachers, whom I think is much less reason for me to be silent about. Even about their grand muftis of back home. I've spoken about the grand mufti of Egypt and whatnot. I've spoken about them multiple times. But bro, Dilly, let's be honest here. Why are we concentrating just on those guys when there are mashayikh on our side that have justified the chopping up of a human being in an embassy in a Muslim land? So let's be honest here. Let's not play double standards here. There are mashayikh that quote you Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, and Ibn Abdul Wahhab and whatnot, right? And they have Islamically justified the brutal murder of a human being and a Muslim in the most vicious manner. Why don't we make a point of that as well? And
I have to say, Shaykh, come on, without again mentioning it, there is no one as prominent from that persuasion.
Okay, agreed. Valid point. Salamna, valid point. But are you going to be consistent? And are you going to call out your own?
Do you fear inconsistency with yourself?
No, not with me, because I've already called out the da'wah multiple times and the logical issues.
So in that case, you have more premise than not to then be consistent, and then
like I said, not only that, but I just feel the refutation culture that has been created by this group of new overzealous undereducated. Wallahi, the description of the Khawarij comes to mind all the time. Sufahu al-ahlami hudatha al-asnan yaquluna min khayri qawl al-bari. This is exactly what the Prophet said about Kharijites, and it really, there's an element of that in this new crowd. They think they're defending the deen, and they cause so much damage to the deen. It's kind of scared me that what if I'm doing that at a higher level? Is it really? So here's the point, Dilly. Will my warning against that individual accomplish anything? People have already made up their minds, and his track record is clear, right? Why will my jumping on the bandwagon of critics make anything different?
Because you're Shaykh Yasir Qadhi.
Today, right now, coincidentally, I posted on Facebook and Twitter about the execution of 12 mashayikh in Egypt,
yes,
and criticized strongly. I don't know if you saw that or not. Right now, okay, my position is very clear, alhamdulillah, consistent here. I think that's good enough. I present my opinion. The other side is presenting, or not presenting in this case, its opinion, and it's very clear. So I don't need to name and shame in order to bring my point across. There are ways to do that. Okay, let's get really controversial, but please don't mention names, okay?
No, we won't mention names.
There's a certain individual, very popular in England, who has some very esoteric views. I call him a new Mu'tazili, denying things and that, this and that, hadith, and very, recently his house was roughed up, let's say, okay? No one named individuals. Now, a number of prominent critics had to issue disclaimers. Oh, we didn't mean that to happen. I have indirectly criticized this individual in like half a dozen lectures. I had to issue no disclaimer because nobody could link my indirect overall, criticism. I have a whole lecture about the return of Jesus because of him. Because of him, the whole lecture. And I even mentioned him by name in that lecture. But I did not need to issue a disclaimer that, hey, my lecture wasn't in. Why did I not need to do that? Because there's a way to get your point across without inciting hatred, without even the potential. I'm not saying that some of the online people caused the ruckus. I know they didn't, but they had to issue disclaimers that they didn't intend for that to happen. I did not have to issue a disclaimer because I don't believe in preaching hatred against an individual, because that is potentially going to lead to violence. So, simple point to you, Ya Akhi Dilly, there's a way to get your point across without creating drama and fitna. I would hope that I'm doing that in my methodology of teaching, and yes, even calling people out and correcting incorrect understandings of Islam.
Those who you have described as having neo-Khariji or Khariji traits in the way they go about articulating themselves, or you would argue lack of articulation, and the way they go about holding others to account, people of knowledge to account, how would you then counter those Muslims who have had a cursory reading of the Seerah, those who have watched your lectures on the life of the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with them all, of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali, and how holding people of knowledge to account in a particular manner, in a particular tone, in a particular way, can fall within their obligation of Amr bil Maruf and Nahy anil Munkar? Or to try also, and when you hear about how the women had held Umar ibn Khattab to account regarding the mahar, and there were others that stood up in Jummah and said that we will straighten you with our swords and so forth. There's various examples that are cited to say that, well, look, you can't just call us Khariji. That's just a cop-out. We're holding people to...
I didn't call those critics Khariji. I said they have tendencies that overlap with Kharijism. They're not Khariji in that sense.
Okay, even tendencies, even trace, even to make a comparison, they would argue saying that, well, this is a part of...
Yeah, Dilly, the reality is different from the examples you've given. They are not qualified to call out a mistake. They're not qualified. Much of what they criticize others for is not a mistake. It's something that they don't know, they haven't been exposed to, and they make it into a mistake. Some of what they criticize for could be corrected in a manner that doesn't cause any drama. So my point is, the reality shows that the fitna that is created, and you know this better than anybody else being in England, what they're doing is the essence of Madkhalism. You know this. It's the essence of Madkhalism, and we've lived through the Madkhali era. We've seen the damage that Madkhalis do to their own adherents, completely spiritually bankrupt, right? Complete burnout of practicing Islam because they can no longer, be good Muslims after that. The same thing is going to happen to this group of people. You cannot create a da'wah whose premise is refuting other da'wahs. And yet this is what this movement is doing. Da'wah has to be more than just refutations. Refutation is like salt. The people that are qualified do it just in the right amount. So if you find something that I say problematic, Umar Sulaiman does problematic, Abu Isa problematic, go to people senior to us. Here in America, we have Shaykh Salah al-Sawi. We consider him to be a great alim, allama. In England, you have great ulama as well. Go through the chain. They will understand when to go public, when to keep private, what is a mistake, what isn't a mistake. Like I said, again, because you're talking to me, much of the criticisms that some of these, ignoramuses create, it's not worthy of criticism at all. It's mainstream Sunnism. I don't mind mentioning this because our brother just passed away, Mufti Taha Karan. May Allah have mercy on him. Ameen. Mufti Taha is an allama. Now everybody across, you heard of his death.
He's a don, of course.
A don. I mean, wallahi, a don in every sense of the term, okay? I don't mind saying this because he's passed away now. We can praise him even more, mashallah, tabarakallah. This brother, whatever, this person criticizing me for crypto reform or whatnot, because I talked about the hudud in this manner. Wallahi, as Allah is my witness, my conversations with Mufti Taha, they're on my phone. I can even, publicize them if need to be, if people doubt this. I'm having a discussion with him about the hudud. And I asked him point blank, I said, so Mufti, this is last year, what do you think then of the proposition that in the modern world, given the nation state and given all of the problems and whatnot, if we call for a rethinking of the hudud for the nation states, not in the Sharia, not a permanent abrogation, but to rethink through in Pakistan, in Tunisia, in Turkey. If we rethink and we make it penalties or jail or whatnot, is this in accordance with the Sharia? I'm asking him because I consider him my senior in knowledge. He is older than me and more knowledgeable than me. And that's my methodology. I always ask people that I trust. So this is a conversation I'm having Mufti Taha Karan. You know what he said to me? Yes, he said, yes, our history is replete with such examples, and it is in accordance with the goals of the Sharia. He said basically, I mean, I don't quote the wordings, he basically said our problem is our ulama are so literalist that they cannot understand that this is of the goals of the Sharia, to rethink through. And because they're so literalist and fundamentalist, he said they have opened the door for progressive Islam, which is something that I've said multiple times. If you're not going to allow legitimate reform, now the term reform makes people worried and scared. When I say reform, obviously my examples are all very clear. We're talking about applying standard usul al-fiqh. We're talking about mainstream epistemology, nothing radical. The Quran, the Sunnah, the Ijma', but rethinking through the textbooks written 1,000 years ago. Rethinking through in light of modernity. Mufti Taha is telling me, yes, we should do this. Shaykh Qadhi is saying this. All of the great ulama are saying this. Now, the brother comes along, may Allah guide him, and if he doesn't repent, then wallah, this particular person, I have no doubt, inshallah, hasanat on the Day of Judgment, because I have kept my tongue very as much as possible. But still, this brother comes along and accuses, a'udhu billah, almost of ridda, almost like he wants to destroy Islam from inside. I mean, honestly, this is jahl murakkab. This is the position of many, many ulama. This is the mainstream default of every single alim that is involved with the councils of Mecca, of Rabita, and the International Union of Muslim Scholars. This is mainstream Sunni fiqh. But our brother here doesn't know this, or he's intentionally ignoring this, and he creates an entire controversy, slandering another Muslim and da'i, accusing of crypto reform or semi-ridda or paganism, whatever it might be. So that's the problem, Dilly. You're opening the floor for ignoramuses to become leaders. It's not their job and responsibility. If the brother feels or anybody feels something is wrong, go up the chain. Ask your ulama, is this something permissible or not? And let them decide what to do.
Before we bring the podcast, not to a close, but to its concluding topic, there is one specific topic I did want to ask you about. I don't want to go into the actual subject matter of the ahruf and the preservation of the Quran and so forth. What I want to perhaps ask you is the exchange that took place between you and Muhammad Hijab. I guess the edited version after what took place afterwards among some Christians and Islam haters. Do you have any regrets about that particular engagement with Hijab?
Yes, of course. I'm a human being and I make mistakes. And I made a mistake with the wordings of that interview. No question about that. May Allah forgive any mistakes that were made. It wasn't done intentionally. And I learned my lesson. These types of difficult topics, you should not impromptu and have a written script about it. Having a live interview without a script on these difficult topics. I think one of the fundamental mistakes I made, and by the way, so Dilly, this goes back to the exact previous point of controversies and whatnot.
Because, sorry, Shaykh. So created before that because it was through an unfortunate email leak.
Because people thought that they're defending the faith, because they're of a particular persuasion. Again, that Najdi mindset, everybody's a deviant, we have to hunt deviants. That's one of my criticisms of that mindset.
Is the maslaha argument not good enough?
You want to find deviancy in other people. You want to kick people off rather than bring people in, right? So when you hear a position that you have not heard, but it is a mainstream position that goes back to great imams like At-Tahawi, like others, which I can quote, which we're not going to go here. When you have a position that is very well established, but you as a minor Talib ilm have never heard of it, and then somebody comes along, you haven't heard it, khalas, he must be a deviant. And so, the person leaks all the emails, again, these Najdis, they think they know everything, but because they haven't been taught it. So, khalas, the maslaha is to expose. Ya akhi, again, creating an entire controversy. My positions, I have spoken to very, very openly with other Tulab al-Ilm and Mashayikh. Not a single one amongst them has considered me to be a deviant. Not one. And I do not keep this hidden. Anybody comes to me, you show me you know this material, I'll open up to you. But it's not a material that should be put on YouTube or online. This is very difficult, very advanced stuff. I have spoken about this in many private gatherings with طلاب العلم. However, this brother, does what he does for whatever reason. Allah is going to be his judge, and on the day of judgment, his niyyah is between him and Allah. And if I get hasanat, it will be. I don't have to give hasanat for sure, because I have again kept quiet in this regard. Wallahi, I've kept quiet about this and all others, despite all that they have done. I ask Allah to keep me my tongue silent about as much as I can about my fellow Muslims. In any case, the hijab interview was done for damage control to what these guys have done. And the irony is, this shows you the problems of witch hunting, right? This shows you the problems. The entire ummah, online da'wah, I should say, not ummah, the online da'wah scene, it was negatively affected because of the unwise choice, and also because this is not a defense. I don't know the brother Muhammad Hijab that well. He seems like a good brother, mashallah. I didn't know that he is interacting with this group of Christian missionaries, right? That group had nothing to do with me pre-hijab, and I had nothing to do with them. I had no idea that that group is going to listen to everything from Muhammad Hijab, right? I've never dealt with that group, and I had no plan to, because they're not academics. They're really a bunch of fitna mongers.
Yeah, they religiously follow what they do analytically and look for any kind of slip up, even when there isn't.
So I have never engaged with them, and I don't plan to. I had to for one library chat because of this, okay? I made a mistake in the wordings about ahruf and qira'at, and it was a bit ambiguous. As I clarified, they jumped on this and they extrapolated to the essence of the Quran. The context is very clear. I'm talking about an opinion of the ahruf. There are holes in the narrative about the position of ahruf, not about the preservation of the Quran. It's very clear. The narrative of the ahruf and the position about the ahruf and qira'at. Okay, not a wise choice of wording, okay? I still thought, if somebody listens to the entire context, is very clear. So for at least 2-3 weeks, I didn't take down the interview. But this group of people took the holes in the narrative and whatnot, and they said he's doubting the Quran. A'udhu billah, a'udhu billah. He's doubting the preservation of the Quran. And that's when I realized, what? These people don't have scruples. They don't have morality. They're just going to do whatever. So I thought, it's just best that I, use the copyright card and just get rid of it, because they don't have scruples. I still believe, if you listen to the entire interview, it's very clear that what they're deriving from it has nothing to do with what I myself said. Still, a better choice of wording could have been done. And this also shows you, like I said, the dangers of opening up this door when you're not qualified to criticize. This is not a topic that needs to be discussed on a YouTube video. You don't need to release an entire refutation of ahruf. Wallahi, anyway, let's not go down there. Ahruf is one of the most complicated topics in the entire ulum al-Quran. If I hold a position that is minority, no problem. Let the ulama come. We can discuss as we have done, and we're going to go away with no problems. But when you get an ignoramus fool who thinks he knows when he doesn't know, a complete jahl murakkab, he doesn't even know. And wallahi, I have spoken with some of these people. I have to tell them, have you read this book? No, I haven't. Have you read that book written in 350 years? No, I haven't. Have you read the position of Imam so-and-so? No, I haven't. I said to one of these brothers, Ya akhi, you haven't even read the basic stuff, and you think you're qualified to criticize me? You haven't even done the research, and you think that because you've never heard of it, this must be a dal position. That's why criticism should be done by the people who are qualified to do so.
Sheikh, back.
This is the example of this, Yasir.
So if we talk about when this leak initially took place, there was obviously one prominent online figure who was associated with that da'wah, who made a video, and he did the rounds and got a fair amount of views. Am I correct, Sheikh, that there was some engagement between yourself and this individual prior to the release of this video?
I have to think, should I? I don't like to give attention to such people, because I really view...
So I guess what I'm trying to get is that, did you identify the lack of knowledge that you're claiming during those interactions? That's the point I'm trying to make.
That's very clear. That's very clear. There's no question about that.
Okay.
And I don't want to get too much, but it is also very clear that drama was intended to be created. It could have been minimized.
No, because you weren't the only person that they pursued. Our own Murabbi and teacher, Shaykh Haytham, and others were part of that witch hunt as well for other unrelated.
They didn't need to even create any drama. They had access to me and to people around me, and it could have been clarified in a very easy manner. But to me, it appears that there was an intentional desire, for whatever reason. I'm not opening their hearts if they really, really thought that I'm semi-murtad and I should be exposed for the benefit of the ummah, or were there other ulterior motives? Because unfortunately, brother, may Allah protect you and grant me ikhlas. But ya akhi, if you have a lecture refuting YQ and you're a nobody, it's going to get 20,000 hits over a night, you know? And we've seen this with when I gave the answer about asking the dead. And I said that, you know, it's haram and you should not do it. People who were unknown released very harsh language, and their YouTube videos are in the hundreds of thousands. You know, YQ is promoting shirk. Subhanallah. I mean, this is the position of Ibn Hajar. Was he promoting shirk as well? This is the position of a Suyuti. You're going to say, so again, and I didn't even respond to them, just silence. And I gave the Najdi lecture because of this, right? This is the problem when people who are not qualified get into the refutation culture. You become somebody who drama is associated with your name. And now that you have nothing, you don't have knowledge to give to the people. All you're doing is criticizing others. So you become, you know, like a worn out stereo, just, you know, going round and round. All you can do is Shaykh Haytham this, Abu Sulaiman this, Abu Yasir this, Abu Isa this, just constantly. All you can do is constantly criticize other people, and that becomes your da'wah because you have nothing else to give to the people. I think the less attention we give to that group and just concentrate on preaching and teaching, which is, inshallah, if you look at my lectures, the majority of my 99, inshallah, percent is just lecture series, benefit, whatnot. Once in a while, you have to correct somebody else. That's done generically, and then leave it on after that.
Right. Shaykh, bringing the podcast to a close to our concluding topic, there's a reason why I saved this particular topic towards the end, because, again, correct me if I'm wrong, the gist that I'm getting from our conversation today, whether it be your realizations of certain positions of the past, changing those positions, prioritizing unity in terms of the ummah's reality, whether it be in the West or in the Muslim world and so forth. I've saved the discussion of revival and Muslim unity towards the end because I feel, if I'm correct, Shaykh, is that one of the reasons of your change in positions or your journey has been geared towards this greater objective of Muslim unity. Would I be correct in understanding that?
We all wish for the revival of the ummah. That's what we're doing. We all wish, and we are seeing a type of revival that is different from the 60s and 70s and 80s. Alhamdulillah. So yes.
Okay.
No question.
So before we go into this concluding topic of discussion, just like there were some quick-fire questions to begin with, there's some quick-fire questions to close with. I want to ask you some questions. I know some of these questions are not straight yes or no questions, so we will be elaborating on them. But just from your study of Islamic history, especially the early centuries, I want to ask you some questions. From your reading of this particular subject matter, if you have ever researched it, is there any Shari'i premise to have two khulafa within normative Sunni Islam?
It was a necessary, not evil, it was just a necessary reality for the bulk of the ummah. That's always been the case, number one. Number two, when you study history, you also realize that the notion of one khalifa doesn't mean central power. The Mughals, for all practical purposes, they were independent. They were, even though they didn't call themselves the Khalifa, they really, generally speaking, for their 350 whatever years, they had nothing to do with the Ottoman Empire. Yes, there's a token, appreciation, but they are independent. So this notion of one unified Khilafah, it's never been like that. Even when we had one Khalifa, you have many dynasties within the empire.
Sheikh, but would you say that happened more towards the Abbasid period? During the Umayyad, there was quite a centralized state, especially the early period.
Yeah, because it's too fast to develop dynasties. That's simply the perks of being the first. It's just too fast to develop dynasties to that level. The Umayyads were only in for 93 years. I mean, how much can you possibly do in 93 years? Number one. Number two, the kernels of those dynasties were planted. And all you need to do is look at, the Umayyad dynasty itself and how it was planted in the time of the Khulafa Rashidun. Enough said. The kernels were planted. You can't help it. That's the way of the world. So the historical reality is that we have never had the type of global infrastructural unity that some people imagine of the past. It's always been somewhat, if not somewhat, completely, disconnected. It's always, you can't expect the Muslims of, let's say Uzbekistan to be under the same government as the Muslims, that were in Morocco, and have the same types of policies. The two were, for practical purposes, completely separate, politically speaking, completely disconnected from each other for the bulk of their existence. So yes, one thing is theory, one thing is reality. Theoretically, two khulafa have been around for a long time. Realistically, what does it mean, two khulafa? When even one khalifa does not actually, what's the point of one khalifa in some central place in Baghdad when, let's say, generically, 70% of the ummah will do nothing if the khalifa commands them to do it? They're completely, for practical purposes, they're disconnected.
Wouldn't it be the case that when you look at the works of, let's say, Imam al-Mawardi, Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniya, Imam Juwayni, and
all theoretical, great works, bro, keep them in theory. Were they ever actually, and again, this is going to get me into trouble with some groups of people. Read your histories, man. Read your histories. It's so frustrating to me that people extrapolate utopic, mythological, romanticized notions of the past. Mawardi is writing as a literally a person in an ivory tower, like literally he's an academic, okay? And that's the ideal, should be the case. Excellent. Was it actually ever in place? Was that actually how it was?
But was it not the case that he wrote those treatises in the context of the weakening Abbasid state and how
who applied them? Yes, he wrote them.
Yeah, the Seljuks nominally gave bay'ah, the Ayyubids nominally gave bay'ah, the Ghaznavis nominally.
Because of Mawardi?
Not because of Mawardi, but because...
Again, so Dilly, there's a lot to be said here. You know my background, I know your background, by the way.
Yes,
so
okay.
I know where you're coming from as well. Look, let me just jump the gun and just lay the beans out, as they say.
Isn't there a balance between cynicism and excessive utopianism? Surely there's a balance between that. Because there has been cases of sin, because the Ottomans had a very centralized state for the best part of 250 years.
They needed modernity to do that. They needed the 1800s and the telegraph and whatnot to begin those types of things. Okay, by the way. Now, look, Dilly, again, let me just lay my cards out on the table very clearly. I am not opposed to those trends that are emphasizing Khilafah and political Islam. I don't view them as deviants or heretics. I believe a spectrum of diversity is healthy for the ummah in this regard. And I believe that live and let live in this case. Okay. What I problematize is that when these trends and the people involved with them get involved in sectarianism and refuting other Muslims more than they get involved with their own goal. And it becomes irritating and a nuisance. And that's why they burn bridges when they don't need to. If you feel that that's your priority, I understand. Bismillah, go for it. But to blame me or others for your priority not having been enacted, bro, all you're doing is just criticizing other people for doing good when all you do is criticize. And again, the latest example, I was raising funds for Palestine after what happened in Aqsa, raising funds for hospitals to treat wounded people, in the uprising last month, right? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Wallahi, like a dozen people, some of them, no mentioning names, you know them, senior members of this movement in the West, in Australia and other places. And all they're doing is criticizing. Until we establish the Khilafah, these funds are useless. Ya akhi, a'udhu billah. What is your problem, man? These are people dying in the hospital, right? And all you're talking about is the Khilafah. I need to treat the wounded. Either you treat them, or you let me raise funds, or you establish the Khilafah. All you can do for most of these critics, which is why it's so frustrating, is to criticize everybody else who's not on your wavelength, while you get nothing done. And that's why it becomes frustrating. I have nothing against your utopic vision. By the way, that's another problem. You have no idea what the Khilafah actually was. We lost Palestine. We lost Palestine under the Khilafah. We regained it not because of the Khilafah, but because Salah ad-Din broke away and became independent. Go read your history. Again, this utopic understanding of what the Khilafah is. Wallahi, you wonder, have they read one chapter in one book of any classical history? You think poverty is going to be eliminated under the Khilafah? You think prostitution is going to be gone? Nobody's going to drink alcohol? Wallahi, you have no idea of Islamic history if that's your vision. But that's what they think, that the Khilafah will solve everything. You know what? My opinion, do what you're doing. Khalas, go, establish it. But let me do what I'm doing. I'm a practical, pragmatic person. I want to save the iman of my children and their generation. I want to teach them about the Prophet ﷺ, teach them the Quran, teach them their theology, teach them how they worship Allah Azza wa Jal, make them proud to be Muslim. Surely you see there's a need for that. Let me do what I'm doing. But when you take me as a target and all of the other du'at who don't agree with your wavelength as a target, then you are creating the same drama and controversies as the Madkhalis are. I have nothing against many of you working to some political game. May Allah bless you when you establish it. And if it is done in a proper manner, inshallah ta'ala, I think it's great. We're all going to join and whatnot. But allow me some skepticism. If I believe it's not going to happen, and therefore I prioritize other things that are happening, right? That's my interpretation. I could be wrong. You don't need to take me as an enemy, which unfortunately many of them have done. Do you see my point?
But the thing is, the Khilafah, Islamic history, the Ottomans, is a subject matter which you have lectured on. It's a subject matter, I think, even on the 100th Hijri anniversary since the breakup of the Ottoman Caliphate, you did a lecture. So would you say, let's not talk about specific groups. Let's put groups aside and movements aside who have made that their call of their da'wah and so forth. Would you say that that particular notion of wanting an Islamic polity, a polity which would perhaps do more than the 57 plus secular nation states that we have today from the Muslim world, or wanting a leader or groups of leaders or a polity that will do more for the ummah in the situation of the Uyghurs and the Palestinians and the Kashmiris and so forth, wanting Islamic leadership or Muslim leadership that would perhaps fulfill some of these aspirations, would you believe that that falls within the broader umbrella spectrum of revival?
Yes, it does. No problem there. All I'm saying, allow people to have their niches and their areas of expertise. Number one. Number two, on a personal level, and I admit I could be wrong, 100%. It's my own personal interpretation and whatnot. I just don't view it as being logistically possible. Logistically. I'm not talking about Islamically, fard kifayat. I'm saying logistically. And I think that people who have these notions are reading in too much, not only to the leader whom they think is going to be the Khalifa, but also to the people that are going to be behind him. Look at the events of the last 15 years. Look at the Arab Spring. Look at Mursi and what happened. Look at some of the leaders of our times, without mentioning names, who might actually maybe in their personal lives be sympathetic to certain causes. But there is real politic, which it's so easy for us to criticize. When you get to those positions, you have to make massive compromises for whatever reasons. Politics is a filthy and dirty business. It's very dirty. Theologians should not be politicians, and politicians will never be idealistic. That's why the Khulafa al-Rashidun were one era, and that's it. Only one era, 40 years, where the best were our leaders. After that, what happens, happens. So do you really think you're going to get somebody in power and they will have unfettered access to everything and all of a sudden they're going to act like an angel? If history has taught you anything, it is that power corrupts. And once you get these people in power, the very people, and that's why Ibn Taymiyyah says, never has any revolution happened except the people who take over are worse than the people who were overthrown. The Abbasids showed this as well. And so many other histories have shown this. My point is, number one, logistically, I don't think it's feasible. That's my personal opinion. I could be wrong. And number two, read history. You are creating an imaginary caliphate that has never existed. Maybe only in the time of Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhum, and that's it. Because even Umar and Uthman and Ali radiallahu anhum, their fitan did not allow them to continue in politics the first two. Right? Yeah. So you are positing a hypothetical, theoretical, mythological, romanticized version of a caliphate that never actually existed. And you think it's going to exist in 2021. You know, allow me to be skeptical, but I'm not dismissing your goals, because in the end of the day, it's good to daydream, and it's good to have high aspirations, and it's good to romanticize and think, because maybe out of 20,000 people, if one is successful, good for you. So that's why I'm saying, you do what you're doing. I'm not opposing you. I'm not standing in your path, but I have one life to live. And I have certain talents, and I have certain responsibilities, and I think I'm doing the best for who I am and doing what I'm doing. And I am gently saying to those other brothers on those strands, stop targeting other du'at if they don't agree with your wavelength and platform. Do what you're doing. Create whatever grandiose visions you have, implement them, and maybe, just maybe, if you're successful, the very people you're criticizing will actually end up supporting you. Because whether you know it or not, inshallah ta'ala, our niyyah is the betterment of the ummah. Our goal is the same. Stop making enemies out of us and concentrate on the goal. You have a different way. I wish you all the best. I have my way, and I think I'm doing what I can do best for the talents that Allah Azza wa Jal has given me.
Shaykh, are you acquainted with Dr. Oimer Anjum from Yaqeen Institute?
Yes, I know him very well, yes.
Okay, and so obviously I had the pleasure of having him on the podcast, I believe a couple of months ago, and it made me think, when you were talking about logistically not possible in 2021, the logistical problem that you're talking about, are you referring to the nation state or the existing world order in the way it's set up with...
Everything. The nation state, the existing world order, and also a very awkward reality, which Shaykh Akram said it much more bluntly than I would ever say. Leave it to him. I have an interview with Shaykh Akram about this as well. Just I asked him this question about Khilafah and whatnot in my interview with him. The reality of the ummah itself and how strict you can be with them. Is the ummah willing to live up to the notions and standards that you think a khilafah is going to bring about? Maybe the ummah itself is not willing to get to that level. And if anything, the Arab Spring and what happened with Egypt should be a wake-up call that practicing Muslims flip sides. And to this day, people that are praying 5 times a day and whatnot did not want people that wanted a religious platform, which shows you a lot of work has got to be done before you get, to the top. So, maybe some aspects of Salafism are still around. Albani famously remarked, establish the Khilafah in your hearts, right? And Allah will establish it in the land. Obviously, I don't agree with that, 100%. But I have to say, there's an element of truth there in that let's prioritize what we can actually prioritize. From a purely logistical standpoint, I can impact thousands of Muslims, inshallah ta'ala, hundreds of thousands, by teaching and preaching. Your version of a khilafah, you can be preaching and teaching of it for 50 years and nothing will happen, as we see for the movements that have prioritized that. So, cost-benefit analysis. Let me do what I think is beneficial. You do what you think is beneficial. And inshallah, Allah will reward us based upon our niyyat and our efforts, inshallah.
Sure. So remaining on this topic, obviously I wanted to ask you still some questions which I'm hoping that you can touch upon. Are you then saying that however a caliphate or a khilafah, whether it is one which is espoused and described by some of the revivalist groups and political movements, or one, if you've ever given some thought about, are you saying that such a polity would be impossible in light of the nation state?
Impossible is a big word. Who am I to say?
Unrealistic, difficult.
Yeah, that's probably better. But I will be, look, Dilly, this is my personal opinion. I could be wrong. Am I not allowed to have an opinion? People get so flustered. It's my opinion. How would you have an Islamic state disconnected from the global system? You can't have banks in there. Disconnected from the UN. Look, sorry to bring this up. ISIS tried, whatever their version was. The Taliban tried, whatever their version was. Okay? How are you going to have a group of people disconnected from the infrastructure of the world? Will your own people want to live under that type of system that are going to be support? So allow me some skepticism. And you know what? I could be wrong. But show me rather than taking me as an enemy.
In your lecture, the Sahaba series, you did the... the Sahaba series, where you spoke about the Khulafa al-Rashideen. And when you spoke about the assassination, the death of Ali radiallahu anh, you mentioned the hadith in Musnad Ahmad, the very well cited, commonly cited one about there will be, after Nabuwa, there will be Khilafah Rashida and so forth. And then you actually said that you personally believe that we're at that latter stage. Do you recall the segment that I'm talking about? Are you still of that position?
Yeah, it's a personal opinion. I could be wrong. It's a personal opinion. Yeah.
Okay.
This is a tyrannical phase of the ummah, and we should emphasize practical change from within rather than through politics. I am still on that overall. I feel it is more useful for the bulk of the scholars to make sure we preserve our iman, rather than to get involved in abstract notions of a political caliphate. It's not going to happen. That's my personal view. And yes, I do believe that. And Allahu A'lam, are we going to have a political system before the Mahdi comes or not? Allahu A'lam. There's another issue. I believe in the coming of the Mahdi. I believe. It's in the hadith, you know. The Mahdi will unify. What we learn in the hadith is that one of the biggest civil wars in the ummah will occur in the time of the Mahdi.
Wouldn't it be between the three sons of the Khalifa?
Yes.
So a Khilafah is already established.
Three sons of the Khalifa could mean three princes. You don't have to be technical. The technical Khilafah doesn't have to be referred to in this. Just like when the Prophet says wajib in the hadith, it doesn't mean the technical wajib. Okay. You know, that's reading in too much. Okay. The hadith that taking a bath is wajib on every Muslim. There's a hadith like this. Our scholars say when our Prophet is saying wajib, he's not indicating the wujub of the usul al-fiqh scholars, which is going to come in 100 years. Right?
What's he stressing? That the urgency?
Yes.
The importance?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So the point being, he says, three sons of the Khalifa. It doesn't have to mean, and by the way, this would go against your notion of one Khilafah anyway. It would also go against the notion of unified. Because even if you were to say there were three actual Khalifas, well, they're having a civil war. But my interpretation is you're reading in too much with the term Khalifa. Three rulers, three princes. They're having a massive civil war. The haram itself is involved. So I'm just positing, hear me out.
Yeah,
don't make tabdi' of me.
No, never.
If we're gonna have civil wars all the way to the coming of the Mahdi, what does that indicate? I'll just leave it at that, and then allow me some skepticism and allow me to do what I think I'm good at. And I'm allowing you, bro, you don't have to follow my opinion. It's an ijtihadi position, man. I don't know the future. But if I have a gut feeling or instinct, and because of that and my reading of history and my knowledge of whatever Allah has blessed me with, I'm pursuing a different path than you, so be it. I am not criminalizing you, considering you to be a deviant, even stopping you in your efforts. Do what you're doing, but I will problematize your problematization of me. That's where I'm going to say you're wasting my time and yours, and you're creating controversy in the ummah.
Another, from your reading and research within the usul of this subject matter, do you personally hold the position or would follow the position that a Khalifa would have to be Qurayshi of Qurayshi lineage?
So ideally, yes. Realistically, no. Meaning, the default is we want... So when you don't have a Qurashi Khalifa, you go with what you have. So were the Ottomans not our Khulafa for 500 years? Are you going to hold that position? That's a position that, yes, you can theoretically hold, but you're going to destroy much of Islamic history. The hadith is in Sahih Muslim. As a Sunni Muslim, mainstream Sunni Muslim, I respect Bukhari and Muslim too much to open up this door that some of our revisionists have done. I don't believe we should do this. I believe it is safest to, unless there's a very specific reason, but anything in Bukhari and Muslim, I believe that we should accept it as a part of our heritage, generally speaking. Yes, certain hadith, again, not getting technical, but you get my point here. Yes. Epistemologically, Bukhari and Muslim occupy a very high place. This hadith is in Sahih Muslim, that the Khilafah is going to be from the Quraysh. And if only two people were alive, one of them Qurashi, he should be the Khalifa. Okay, we accept it. However, this is not a negation of a non-Qurashi caliphate. It is the recommendation that if you have the power, you should choose a Qurashi. And the Mahdi will be Qurashi, by the way. So, again, 1 + 1. Civil wars all the way to the Mahdi. The Mahdi is going to come, he's from the Quraysh. You get my skepticism, and I'll leave it at that because it's a position that I hold. Personally, I don't preach it.
During your conversations with Mufti Quran, rahimahullah, about the hudud and its implementation or its non-implementation in the context of nation states and so forth, did the conversation ever occur that in the absence of an imam or a sultan or a khalifa, that is there even a need or a legitimacy to implement the hudud? In the absence of Islamic courts, is there a need to implement the hudud? Were these conversations?
No, I didn't speak to him specifically about that, but I know from my conversations with him that we were on the same wavelength. And that wavelength is, as Muslim minorities in South Africa and America and in Canada and whatnot, we are not calling for this. But in Muslim majority countries, in Pakistan, in Malaysia or whatnot, definitely our political laws should be based upon our moral code. They're definitely. So how we view drinking, prostitution, public nudity, how can we not take our morality into account, right? But must we implement in the nation state the exact same hudud that are found in our classical books? That was my discussion with Mufti Karan. And by the way, with many scholars, but because they're alive. And again, I'll say this, Dilly, that wallahi, because of the rise of these fanatics, and Mufti Karan said this in the text to me, and I don't mind saying this. He said, because of the intransigence of the fundamentalist literalists, right? Much progress has been impeded because people are too scared to talk about this topic. Most ulama who have studied usul al-fiqh, maqasid al-shara', understand that having some laws in conformity with Islam is better than having no laws. So if in Pakistan, let's say, we can get some laws passed, let's just say we can criminalize blasphemy, because in the end of the day, nobody's actually being executed even in Pakistan for blasphemy. Every time. In Saudi Arabia, that hasn't happened, bro. Forget Pakistan. In Saudi Arabia, it has not happened. You get more political prisoners killed.
Absolutely.
Then you get... So, if it's not going to happen, can we think of a law that's actually going to be more effective and actually bring about a change than some utopic, romanticized thing that doesn't actually happen? You see my point here, I'm open to the idea. That's all I'm saying. I'm not a Saudi or a Pakistani, but definitely from an usul al-fiqh paradigm, ulama in those lands should have the freedom to discuss these types of issues without the worry of being called a kafir or whatnot, which is what is happening. So the fear of fundamentalism, number one, the fear from the fundamentalists, number one, silences legitimate talk, and number two, opens the door for the all-out progressives who don't respect their tradition and who don't mind criminalizing mainstream Islam. And that's what Mufti Karan himself said to me in the text message. And again, very clear that because of the intransigence of this new group of critics and whatnot, what has happened is legitimate internal Islamic reform has been silenced, and you're opening the door for all complete progressive kufr and bakwas to come out. I'm a critic of progressive Islam. I've always been a critic of progressive Islam. But because ignoramuses, and some of them have knowledge and some of them don't, criminalize genuine Islamic talk of hudud and whatnot, people are either silent or they open the door for the progressives. That's what has happened.
The final question I want to ask you, from your reading of history, and again the usul and the legal nuances and maxims pertaining to this subject matter, is there an unequivocal position pertaining to rebelling against a Muslim ruler?
Oh, not at all. This is one of the myths of modern Najdi Salafism. Listen to my latest library chat, which was very generically entitled Some Historical Controversies in the First Century of the Hijrah. And I closed the comments section as well because I don't want to cause controversy. And I made the disclaimer, it's an advanced talk and whatnot. I'm asking you, have you listened to that one?
I haven't.
Okay. Listen to that as soon as you're done with, whenever you have time. It's my latest library chat. Some historical controversies in the first century of the Hijrah. Inshallah, after this lecture, for the rest of your life, I know you don't believe this, but anybody who believes that it is a mainstream understanding of Sunni Islam to always be quietistic and never rebel against the ruler, that will be demolished. Okay? This is a construct of modern Najdism in order to facilitate their political acquiescence to their royal family. It is not Islamic. Yes, mainstream Sunnism overall has been quietist, but not obsequious. There's a big difference between the two, right? And quietism is not the same as bootlicking, which is what the modern one does. And pacifism does not mean that you agree with the ruler or you don't criticize the ruler. Again, all of this is discussed in this lecture. And also, it is one opinion. We've always had the other position where it is allowed to rebel against the ruler for certain reasons. And Abu Hanifa was of this position. Many of the Sahaba and Tabi'un, in Yazid's time, the rebellion of Medina was done by Sahaba and sons of the Sahaba. Okay, the rebellion of Ibn al-Ash'ath, Anas ibn Malik supported it. Anas ibn Malik supported the rebellion against the Umayyad dynasty. Are you going to call him, a'udhu billah, non-Sunni? Again, Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, you're going to say he doesn't know the Sunnah of the Prophet, and I mentioned this, even the pacifists like Ibn Umar and Ibn Abbas, their hearts were with Hussein against Yazid. Whereas the pacifists of our time, Their hearts are with the Al Fulans and the royal families and not with the masses. You cannot compare the two. So please stop deceiving people with this, newfangled interpretation. We are not bootlickers to corrupt regimes. That's not Islam. Even if you agree to be pacifist, it is done to avoid more bloodshed, like Ibn Abbas and Ibn Umar said, and it is not done to support tyrannical regimes. And listen to that lecture, and you'll hear my thoughts. Historical. Wallah, you cannot. It's not even me. I'm telling you history. In the first century of the Hijrah, what happened? These are the Salaf. How can Salafis go against the Salaf? You listen to my lecture and you'll understand, inshallah, based upon that.
Shaykh Yasir, Jazakumullah khairan for your time. I thoroughly enjoyed today's conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as well, as much as I did. If I said anything to disrespect you or wrong or to hurt to offend you, please forgive me for the sake of Allah. And I hope this is the first of many podcasts to have you soon in the future, inshallah.
Inshallah, may Allah Azza wa Jal keep our hearts united. May Allah Azza wa Jal forgive me if I also went. Sometimes, again, we're all human beings, and sometimes irritation and frustration is expressed. So I don't remember the exact wordings I used against some of my Muslim brethren. I ask Allah's forgiveness if they were too harsh, because yes, I am a human being, and sometimes words and adjectives are used. I ask Allah to guide them and to guide me and to forgive them and to forgive me and to keep our hearts united and to guide all of us and to guide others through us. Our ultimate goal is the protection of this deen and the pleasure of Allah. We might have different paths to that goal, but inshallah ta'ala, those of us who are broad-minded enough to understand we should tolerate differences, we should work together for the greater good of the ummah. That's my main message based upon the questions that you have given, inshallah.
Jazakumullah. I mean to your du'as. Do you think there'll be any fiascos on the back of this podcast?
There always are, but inshallah, nothing as bad as the previous one. So we can cope with those, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. Sheikh, take care. Keep us in your du'as. Assalamu alaikum.
You as well. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Barakallahu feek.
يا من أجبت دعاء نوح فانتصر وحملته في فلكك المشحون يا من أحال النار حول خليله روحا وريحانا بطول